Today's guest, Sara Riggare, is living what so many of us in digital health try to do, to make the system work better for patients. Her research and personal experience demonstrates how healthcare systematically fails to recognise patient-generated knowledge as valid. It is not used widely in research, nor is it used as the basis for medical decisions in healthcare. Sara's life work is dedicated to changing that, and that's a message George and I wanted to amplify. Hello and welcome to Pulse Amplify, where we sit down with the leaders and changemakers shaping the future of health. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
Our guest today on the show is Sara Riggare, researcher, patient advocate, and someone who has spent more than a decade arguing, and I would say with considerable force and evidence, that patients are not passive recipients of healthcare, but active producers of knowledge about it. Sara holds a PhD from Radboud University in the Netherlands and is working with Uppsala University in Sweden. Her work sits at the intersection of digital health, self-tracking, and patient involvement. It is intellectually rigorous and deeply personal, as you will discover. Sara's writing has appeared in the BMJ in many scientific journals and on her long-running blog, where she publishes under the tagline, "Not patient, but impatient." Sara, we are thrilled to have you here. I tried to get you out to Australia numerous times and it never quite worked, but a podcast is the best we can do. We're really pleased that you're here. So welcome to the Pulse Pod studio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I would love to come to Australia sometime, but there was a pandemic in the way and all sorts of other things, right?
So annoying. Very inconsiderate, that pandemic.
I know, right?
It is great to have you. We had lots of plans, but unfortunately the pandemic had other plans for us.
Yeah, I know.
Sara, now I'd love you to introduce yourself to the Pulse Poddies. You are a health informatics researcher, you're a patient researcher, and someone living with Parkinson's disease. Your journey is incredibly unique. So can you take us back to the beginning? How did your diagnosis shape the path that led you to a PhD?
Yeah, the somewhat short version is that I was working in environmental risk assessment and scenario analysis for 14 years. While already having symptoms, but I didn't know they were symptoms of Parkinson's disease at that time. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease when I was 32, and I had a newborn baby at home. That was a really hard blow. I felt like I fell down into a black hole, but I couldn't stay there because the baby needed me. So I crawled up and out of the hole and started rebuilding myself and my life. And then a couple of years in, I wanted to do more. I wanted to combine my engineering skills with my patient experiences and try to improve things for myself and others with chronic diseases. At that time, I thought of myself as becoming a Babel fish, if you know you're a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes. Love the Babel fish. Yep.
So I wanted to be a Babel fish between patients and researchers, in Parkinson's specifically. And then I also realized that to be taken seriously by researchers, you had to be a researcher yourself. I said to my husband, I'm not, so I can't do this. And then he said, well, you're not a researcher now, but maybe you can become one. And I was like, no, I can't do that. And then I thought, maybe I can. So I started looking for ways into that world and found a master's program in health informatics that started that fall 2010 at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. I applied and was admitted, and the rest is history. That was my first step into this world. I've not regretted it 1 second.
I love it. And good on your husband as well for encouraging you. It's always so fascinating. It's a topic for a different type of podcast, but when other people see something in you that you don't see and they encourage you and it changes your whole world.
He's my biggest supporter and my most harsh critic at the same time. So frequently I use him as my rubber duck. So I present for him and let him tear it apart if he can.
It's always good to have someone like that in the house with you. So,
Yeah.
But your PhD journey wasn't straightforward. So my understanding is you started your PhD at Karolinska, then had to switch over to Radboud for various reasons. What was that all about?
Yeah, so I applied to defend my thesis at the Karolinska Institute in 2018. And I had 2 publications, maybe 3, I don't remember exactly. But one of those publications was self-experimentation. So it was on myself, looking at my own data and my own condition. And they didn't think that was worthy of, they wasn't PhD thesis material. And there was also this discussion about if I would have needed to have an ethical approval for it. But the main reason was that it wasn't PhD thesis worthy as in scientific rigor, or they saw it as a case study, basically. And so they said, we can't approve this. So I had the choice to either go back and do more or switch over. And then the pandemic hit and everything. And I got an offer from Radboud University from Bas Bloom that I couldn't refuse.
Oh, that must have been heartbreaking at the time, though.
It was, but then again, it wasn't the worst thing that had happened to me. I mean, nobody died.
No. Fair enough, it puts perspective. Well, I'd love to talk about the topic of your PhD. And by way of introduction to it, the cover art of your PhD, which I think it's got to be one of the most iconic infographics of digital health globally. And it's really anchored in your 1 versus 8,765 concept.
So already in 2014 sometime, I started thinking, so how much time do I spend in neurological healthcare? And I figured it's about 1 hour every year. And then I was thinking, so what would that look like 1 hour compared to the rest of the hours of the year? So I started doing the infographic with 1 red dot and 8,765 blue dots, where the red dot symbolizes the 1 hour I spent in healthcare, and the blue dots. Speaking of my husband, he actually said then that he thought I was wasting my time doing all that work for this image. But that he said it over and over again, I was wrong. Because he thought, what will you use it for? And I didn't know what I was going to use it for. I was just curious. And that infographic has been at conferences in countries where I haven't been. I frequently get messages on social media saying, oh, your image is here. Are you here? I'm like, no, I'm not. So there are hundreds of people all over the world using it with my permission because I made it Creative Commons. But it relates to the topic of my PhD. The title is Personal Science in Parkinson's Disease. And personal science is the research framework, the framework for using your own data, your own observations to answer your own questions.
And what it does highlight, obviously, that patients are very much an underutilized resource in the system, that they only spend such a short part of their time with the healthcare system. What does that number reveal about how the health system thinks about patients? Do you think they realize they're missing?
I think that's a one-on-one experience in this case as well, because people have seen this image of mine and started crying because they were convinced that they were doing it patient-centered or person-centered, whichever. But when they've seen my image, they realized that they have not. So slowly but steadily, I think it's changing people's views. Even if it were double the amount of hours in healthcare, it's still a fraction of the year. So it is a very representative image for a lot of chronic and very complex conditions.
I think you taking your personal experience and studying it at an academic level with all that rigor, it really changes the game. But you shouldn't need to do a PhD to have credibility in your own story and your own experiences. But how do you feel that this is changing, or is it changing the way that we think about evidence in medicine?
I really didn't know how right I was when I said that in 2010, that to be taken seriously by researchers, you have to be a researcher yourself. I really didn't realize how very spot on that is. For me, personal science is basically just engineering, iteration, sort of continuous improvement. And so sometimes I'm baffled at how rare it is, because it's not rare in the real world. It's rare in research papers. I've been thinking a lot about these things, and I actually just recently was given funding for a 4-year big project by the Swedish Research Council, starting grant that covers my salary basically for 4 years, and a PhD student as well.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're just getting started. And the project is called Chronic Knowledge. It's continuing this reasoning that you just made. And I've been thinking a lot about what is the problem that chronic knowledge wants to address. We know that chronic conditions are increasing. That's seen as a big problem. We know that healthcare systems are struggling. And the smaller issue in most cases is that research on self-care is lacking. There is not a lot published on self-care in chronic conditions. But are these things, are they really the core issues? That chronic conditions are increasing, that's actually a consequence of scientific progress and should be a success to be celebrated rather than seen as a problem. So we survive instead of dying from our conditions. And as far as healthcare systems go, we have known for over 50 years that the care models used in the systems are not fit for purpose. It's not news. And that research on self-care is lacking, that is a genuine problem. But why is research on self-care lacking? So if we look at this differently with another lens, if we look at it from an epistemic perspective, then we can see that healthcare operates on an epistemology that systematically fails to recognize patient-generated knowledge as valid, meaning that whose knowledge is used as basis for decisions. And that is the real problem. And that is what I want to change. And that's really what it's about. To not instead of, but as a complement. It's not patient's knowledge instead of clinician's knowledge. It's together that we can change the world.
I love that concept. Sara, the reality is, like you said, we've shifted from an acute care model to a chronic care model, but we're still trained as clinicians to treat acute disease. This idea of chronic data, I think, is fantastic. But how do we get clinicians to understand how they can utilize that data? Because at the moment, we'll take vital sign measurements when you come into our offices, but we actually can't take into account long-term data that captured in conditions like Parkinson's, where there's that remitting changes and the interaction with medication. Capturing that information is complex.
Oh, yeah, it's so complex. And another aspect is, of course, the subjective and objective measurements. There are no objective biomarkers in Parkinson's. So I sometimes say that I have diabetes envy. That, of course, is a terrible thing to say, but people with diabetes type 1, they have an objective biomarker for their current state, as well as the long-term prognosis in the blood glucose level and the ADH1C. And we have nothing. So I wrote a blog post on that a while back saying that it's crappy hand in type 1 diabetes to have maybe an ACE, 5 of clubs, etc. But in Parkinson's, you would have an old bus ticket and some pocket lint instead. And try to play poker with that. So there's the equity aspect of it as well. So it's a tricky problem for sure.
And it's true for many diseases. Most of the neurological diseases have very objective measures. Yeah. Even cardiovascular diseases have symptoms that come and go. I remember speaking to a neurologist many years ago who told me that they had to determine what a person's Cinemet dosage is based on what they see in that 1 hour with the patient, not what happens to the patient for the other 8,000 plus that you comment on.
Exactly. And I don't have any easy fixes for this because there aren't any easy fixes. This is a fundamental issue that we will have to solve as a collective together, the whole world, I would say, in ways that we probably don't know yet.
Time for a quick break. And when we return, Sara is going to be talking to us how she decided to use her chemical engineering skills to modify the dosage of her medication based on her deep understanding of her symptoms and how they would come and go. And we're also going to be talking about a new word that she has coined and, of course, hashtag patients use AI, and get Sara's take on how AI is changing things for patients and the healthcare system. We'll be back soon. Sara, I remember when we met and on stage you were talking about how you and your neurologist ended up being okay with this, that you modified your own dosage because of exactly what you just said, George, that your clinician only sees you for that 1 hour a year. Could you tell us a bit about how that came about?
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and it's a good thing to be an engineer when you're faced with a tricky optimization problem. And I stumbled into self-tracking. I didn't know that that was what I was doing. When I was writing in my paper calendar notes on how my physical functioning was worse in the afternoon than in the morning with my current doses. And this was in the 1990s, mind you. So it was even before I had my Parkinson's diagnosis. And then I found my way into by chance, patients like me, and I used their doctor visit sheet, and I printed that and took that to my next visit, my neurologist. And he didn't really embrace it, but he didn't put me off it. He didn't encourage me, but he also didn't discourage me. So I kept going and exploring that in different ways until I then started exploring with finger tapping. I came across a PhD thesis a long time ago where they had used finger agility as a proxy for medication effective in technology-supported Parkinson's treatment. I had just gotten my first smartphone and found an app that could track finger tapping on the screen. And I started exploring with it, and I found it to be useful to see the variations in my symptoms, how agile I was, and using that as a proxy for gross motor function, basically. I found that I had a dip around lunch in my function that I didn't know about before. So I tweaked my medication timings a bit, and then I had a more even effect of my medications throughout the day.
I love that. And I love, like you said, your chemical engineering background and having an optimization problem and just collecting the data and making modifications based on that.
Yeah.
So when I went through med school many, many years ago, the engineering school was on the other side of campus and we had nothing to do with them. But now we're starting to see much more integration. And the reality is a lot of engineering concepts coming into healthcare. And Louise knows I've got one son who's a doctor and two sons who are engineers. And I keep on telling them that between the three of them, they should be able to solve problems. But the problem has always been from a patient perspective. Doctors have always treated patients as passive participants.
Yeah.
We treat patients, not patients working together. How do we change that mindset? While some patients like to be passive, as we have obviously better educated patients going forward and access to more information, which we never had years ago. Patients didn't have access to the clinical trial information 30 years ago, but now everything's available to us. How do we get that concept of an active patient, joint decision-making happening?
30 years ago, we didn't even have access to PubMed. I remember reading about a patient that faked a call to the medical library, pretending to be his doctor and ordering up copies of a journal article. And then he was found out because they recognized the doctor's voice and they knew that wasn't him that called. Patients will find a way to information. But it's another tricky problem, actually, a very difficult thing. I provoked a group of neurologists where I was giving them a presentation on the patient perspective a few years back. We have a patient act in Sweden saying that patients have the right to information about their conditions and some other things as well. And so I said, according to this act, this law, you have to inform patients about what the consequences of X or Y is. Yes, they said. And you know that knowledgeable, active, and engaged patients have better outcomes and use healthcare more effectively and live longer. Yes. So don't you have the responsibility to tell your patients that if they remain passive, they will fare less well. They will have worse outcomes. And then they were very provoked. And they said that, oh, no, but some patients don't want to be active. No, but if they have the information, they might change their minds. Because if they are told that you will have a better outcome if you remain active. So I was never invited back to that group. I'm not sure if there's a connection or not. But it is a tricky problem. And another problem, also there's a terminology problem. Because we use these terms, patient participation, patient involvement, patient engagement, as synonyms for all sorts of things. And I've started to divide them up in a 2x2, where on the y-axis there's healthcare and research. And on the x-axis there is the primary level and secondary level.
Oh, I love a good matrix. We will put a link to that in the show notes.
Now, Sara, you've coined a new term, SPETS patient, which has been published in the BMJ. Can you tell us about SPETS patient and why did we need this new word?
Yeah, so as you know, Louise, you've been at the Stanford Medicine X conference. That's where the e-patients are the kings and queens. And I tried using e-patient in Sweden. And e-patient is some patient that's engaged, equipped, educated, also electronic, all sorts of e words. But it didn't work in Sweden. So I realized no one wanted to use the word. So I realized that we needed to have something else. So then I realized that there are lots of similarities between what lead users do in design and technology. They innovate on their own needs and find ways to create new solutions. Lead user innovation is a term coined by Eric von Hippel at MIT. I realized that there's a lot of similarities between what I've seen patients and family caregivers do to deal with a shitty hand, basically, to do what they can with what they have. So I started thinking, what's the Swedish translation of lead user? And it was spetsanvändare. So spets is some arrowhead or someone forging a way forward, and användare is that user. So I switched out användare for the patient, and the word spetspatient was born. And we describe it as a patient or an informal caregiver who is actively supporting their own or their loved one's health, as well as often also trying to improve the healthcare system. And it was one of the Swedish Language Council's new words in 2017 on the list of new words. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, what about AI? So our joint friend, ePatient Dave, has coined that term, which you now see online everywhere, #patients use AI. And there's some amazing people, particularly in America, talking about that. So what are your thoughts? As someone who's spent years arguing for that epistemic legitimacy of patient knowledge, how do you see AI changing that equation?
AI has a huge potential, but what's really concerning is that there is very little research being done on how patients are already using AI autonomously from healthcare. AI will change a lot of things, but not in the way that the healthcare system thinks for patients. Healthcare systems will use it to improve slightly, but for patients, it's a whole new ballgame. And I follow the work that Dave and Jill Friedman and others do with patients use AI with great interest. Hugo Campos is another person who does amazing things with AI to help his own health. And this is not something that might happen tomorrow. It happened yesterday. There's a person in the US who has built a conversational, safe AI conversationalist for Parkinson specifically. It's called Ask Chan. It's on thrivewelltogether.com. And it's amazing. It's a very well-built tool that can speak lots of languages and lots of context, and really useful for people with Parkinson's. And there are similar in many other conditions as well. This is already happening, but the research is not keeping up. Research is so focused on the healthcare system's use of AI. They're not interested in these that are really able to revolutionize knowledge gathering for patients.
You make an excellent point there. There's lots of research about how clinicians use AI, but the reality is the democratization of the data through AI for patients changes the whole scenario. But many years ago, Eric Topol wrote the book, The Patient Will See You Now, but it never actually came to real fruition. It was still a very clinician-centric world. But the next step, of course, is how do we use AI to actually drive more self-care and drive more patient-led research? We have the outliers like yourself and ePatient Dave, but still a small minority. How do we get the other patients, the other 99% of the patients who aren't on the ePatient Dave newsfeed to understand that they can use this tool and use it responsibly?
10 years ago, I wasn't this active, and 10 years ago, Dave wasn't this active that he is now. Being an active and engaged patient isn't constant. It's evolving, and it's evolving by trial and error. I'm not saying it will happen automatically, but it is happening organically. And social media, that's actually the biggest contribution of technology in my world. It's not data, it's not these devices. It's how people can connect with each other more easily and more quickly and more productively. And that's the real revolution in health. So digital health, to me, the digital doesn't really need to be there. Health is digital, whether we think about it as digital or not. Healthcare, on the other hand, that's another story. Health is digital already, but healthcare is not.
That is really well said, actually. Excellent. Sara, there's this constant tension between clinical problem solving and whole person care. I've never met a clinician who doesn't want to deliver person-centered care, but it's pretty much impossible to do it when a system that has processes and business models that are just not designed around the needs of the individual. So if I gave you a magic wand and said, okay, go ahead, redesign it, what does healthcare look like if we truly design systems around expert patients?
Yes, it's difficult because I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I know some questions we can start asking together. It's not something that I would see as I have the solution, everybody else should just do as I say. It's more that let's explore it together. So the first thing would be, instead of saying, tell us your problems, we will tell you what's wrong with you. Instead, we're saying, we together find out what the problem is. And rather than being sorted into these silos, the magnitude of specialties in healthcare is, of course, have served us well over the years, but it's also getting to be sub-optimization. Either patients have to start becoming clinicians or clinicians have to become more generalists, or maybe both. So one study that I'm really excited for in this chronic knowledge project is that we're going to interview clinicians, healthcare professionals that have become patients, to see what they see is wrong in the system. People who have been clinicians for many years and then suddenly, oh shit, is this what it looks like? I thought this was working. So when they see the system from the user side, they have often, I think, epiphanies that could be used for improving things going forward.
We're going to have to get you back on the show in future years so you can talk to us more about the outcomes of your new project that you're embarking on there with chronic knowledge. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to have you on the show. George and I are always really honoured when people from that patient perspective come on the show. George and I end up in a lot of rooms, and so do the Pulse listeners. We end up in a lot of rooms where we can influence decisions, and being able to reflect on stories like your own, as well as the wins that you have had and the leadership that you're taking in this space, will have a lot of impact outside of us just chatting today. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is the second best thing. The best thing would, of course, have to be in Australia live in person, but this is the second best.
Yep, it's been a real pleasure. Your perspectives as someone who is going through a chronic disease and understands, and tying that engineering principles to healthcare, I think that's really part of the solution. To Louisa's earlier question, the challenge we have with our current system, of course, is that healthcare is defined by episodes of that we sit in the same room with a clinician, and we need to start thinking outside that box. I'm looking forward to your ongoing research and keeping in touch with the patient-driven activity in Europe around this.
I'm looking forward to keeping in touch as well.
Yes. And George, I want to know next week what your sons collectively think of this episode.
Absolutely.
I want to know as well.
I'll keep you in the loop.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by me, with audio engineering by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Emily Mara, co-founder and publisher of Pulse IT News, for all of her support. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe, follow and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, you can visit pulseit.news to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Please, as always, send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. George and I always love to hear from you.